The Tiger Eye's 88mm cannon was locked onto Staff Sergeant Billy Mudslinger Thompson's Sherman tank at 800 yards when the Alabama farm boy realized his grandfather's cotton field irrigation technique was either going to save his crew from certain death in the next 5 seconds or get them all killed by the most feared tank commander in the entire German army, SS Oberfuhrer Klaus Iron Fist Richter, who had never missed a shot at this range and was about to add 4 more American names to his kill tally of 127 Allied tanks. "Billy, he's got US dead to rights." Corporal Jake Martinez screamed from the gunner's position as the massive German Tiger tank adjusted its aim through the smoke and debris of the burning French village of Saint-Vith, where Richter's Panzer unit had been systematically destroying every American tank that dared to challenge German armor superiority. "That 88 is pointed right at our driver's hatch. We're sitting ducks in this mud. I can see the muzzle flash building." The tactical situation was hopeless by every military calculation that mattered in armored warfare. Richter's Tiger Eye weighed 57 tons and carried frontal armor 180mm thick, making it essentially invulnerable to the Sherman's 75mm gun at any combat range. The German tank's 88mm cannon fired 22-pound armor-piercing shells at 2,700 feet per second with enough kinetic energy to penetrate any Allied tank's armor and continue through the rear plate, killing everyone inside while often setting the vehicle on fire. Billy's Sherman M4A3 weighed only 32 tons and carried 76mm of frontal armor that might as well have been cardboard against Richter's gun. The mathematical reality was simple and brutal. The Tiger could destroy the Sherman from 2,000 yards away, while the Sherman had to get within 500 yards to have any chance of penetrating the Tiger's armor, and even then only with a perfect shot to specific weak points that were almost impossible to hit under combat conditions. But Billy Thompson wasn't seeing mud as a problem, he was seeing it as salvation. Growing up on his family's cotton farm in rural Alabama, Billy had learned how to use water, soil, and timing to make things happen that city folks thought were impossible. His grandfather had taught him that the right mixture of clay and water could stop a flood, redirect a river, or save a crop from drought if you understood the physics of fluid dynamics and soil mechanics. "Jake, trust me on this," Billy shouted as he worked the Sherman's controls in ways that no tank training manual had ever described, using techniques he'd learned driving tractors through Alabama mud that would either save their lives or get them killed in the most spectacular tank battle failure of World War II. "I'm going to show that German what Alabama mud can do when it's properly motivated." The Tiger's engine note changed from the deep rumble of idle power to the higher-pitched whine of combat acceleration as Richter prepared to fire the shot that would end Billy Thompson's war permanently. Through his commander's periscope, the German tank ace could see the American Sherman tank trapped in the muddy valley with nowhere to retreat and no tactical options remaining except to die with whatever dignity American tank crews could maintain when facing superior German military technology. But what the German tank ace didn't understand was that he was about to face agricultural engineering applied to armored warfare, and sometimes a farm boy's understanding of dirt and water was deadlier than a Wehrmacht panzer training manual that had never contemplated the possibility that enemy tanks might use hydraulic principles as weapons rather than obstacles. If stories of American ingenuity and unlikely battlefield victories move you, hit that subscribe button. These accounts show what happens when farm wisdom meets German precision, proving that sometimes the most sophisticated military equipment can be defeated by the simplest applications of rural common sense and desperate courage. The impossible shot that should have killed everything began when SS Oberfuhrer Klaus Richter aligned his Tiger I tank's 88mm cannon with mathematical precision at 0847 hours on December 17, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge's most desperate phase, when German armor was systematically destroying American tank formations that had never faced anything as lethal as the Tiger's combination of firepower, armor protection, and tactical expertise. Richter was 34 years old, a career Waffen-SS officer who had commanded panzers since the 1940 campaign in France and had perfected the art of tank-on-tank combat through 4 years of continuous warfare across Europe, North Africa, and the Eastern Front. His Tiger I had survived encounters with Russian T-34s at Kursk, British Cromwells in Normandy, and American Shermans at Bastogne by maintaining the tactical advantage of superior firepower combined with Richter's uncanny ability to place 88mm shells exactly where they would cause maximum destruction. The German tank commander had learned armored warfare from legendary panzer leaders like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel, but he had developed his own tactical philosophy based on mathematical precision and psychological intimidation that had made him the most feared individual tank commander on the Western Front. Richter calculated range, deflection, and target movement with the accuracy of an artillery computer, while his reputation for never missing a shot demoralized Allied tank crews who understood that facing Richter's Tiger meant almost certain death. His combat record was legendary even by German standards: 127 confirmed tank kills across 4 years of warfare, including 47 Russian T-34s during the Battle of Kursk, 31 British tanks during the Normandy campaign, and 49 American Shermans during the current Ardennes offensive. Richter had never been forced to retreat from a tank engagement, never suffered serious damage to his Tiger Eye, and never failed to destroy an enemy tank that came within effective range of his 88mm cannon. Target identified: Sherman tank, 800 meters, stationary, Richter announced to his crew in the clipped, professional tone that had become his trademark during 127 successful tank kills across 3 years of combat. Range confirmed by optical rangefinder. Wind negligible. Target has nowhere to retreat due to mud conditions. This will be a clean kill through the driver's vision port, followed immediately by traverse to secondary targets. Richter's Tiger Eye was positioned on high ground overlooking the muddy field outside Saint-Vith, with perfect visibility across 1,200 yards of open terrain where American tanks had been trapped by German tactical maneuvering and forced into a killing zone that offered no cover, no concealment, and no escape routes. The mathematical geometry of the engagement favored the German tank in every measurable way: elevation advantage, armor thickness differential, gun penetration superiority, and crew experience level. The 88mm cannon that Richter commanded was arguably the most effective anti-tank weapon of World War II, capable of penetrating any Allied tank's armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards while firing shells that weighed 22 pounds and traveled at 2,700 feet per second with enough kinetic energy to punch through steel plate and continue through the rear of enemy vehicles. Against the Sherman's maximum 76mm armor thickness, Richter's gun was mathematically guaranteed to achieve complete penetration and catastrophic destruction of the target vehicle and crew. Richter's gunnery technique was based on principles that he had developed through analysis of over 100 successful tank kills, using mathematical calculations that eliminated guesswork and reduced tank-on-tank combat to a series of precise measurements and mechanical procedures. He accounted for range, target movement, wind conditions, ammunition temperature, and gun barrel wear to achieve accuracy levels that approached mechanical perfection under combat conditions. But Richter had never faced an opponent like Staff Sergeant Billy Thompson, whose understanding of soil mechanics and hydraulic engineering was about to prove that German mathematical precision could be defeated by American agricultural innovation applied under extreme pressure when conventional military tactics offered no hope of survival. The American farm boy who changed everything had grown up on a 640-acre cotton farm in rural Alabama, where his grandfather had taught him that successful farming required understanding the relationship between water, soil, and timing in ways that couldn't be learned from textbooks but had to be developed through hands-on experience with the natural forces that determined whether crops survived or failed during the unpredictable weather patterns that could make or break entire families. Billy Thompson was 22 years old, the son of a sharecropper family that had worked the same red clay soil for 3 generations without ever owning the land they farmed. Billy's grandfather, Old Joe Thompson, had survived the Great Depression by developing irrigation techniques that used gravity, soil composition, and water pressure to move rivers where rivers didn't want to go and to make cotton grow in places where cotton shouldn't grow according to every agricultural textbook that had ever been written. Old Joe had learned his techniques during the devastating floods of 1927, when the Alabama River had overflowed its banks and threatened to wash away every farm in the county. While other farmers had evacuated and waited for the water to recede, Old Joe had stayed behind and experimented with levee construction, water redirection, and soil stabilization techniques that not only saved his crops but actually improved the land's fertility by controlling the flow and deposition of nutrient-rich floodwater. Billy, Old Joe had said while teaching his grandson to build levees that could redirect the Alabama River during spring flooding, using nothing but shovels, mules, and an intuitive understanding of hydraulic engineering that had never been formally studied but had been passed down through generations of farmers who understood water better than any college-educated engineer. City folks think water goes where it wants to go, but farm folks know that water goes where you make it go if you understand the rules that water has to follow. Same with mud, same with dirt, same with anything that flows, you just got to be smarter than what you're trying to control. The specific technique that would save Billy's life in a tank battle had been developed by Old Joe during the drought of 1936, when conventional irrigation methods had failed and cotton crops throughout Alabama were dying from lack of water. Old Joe had created a system of temporary dams and spillways that used high-pressure water jets to break up clay hardpan and redirect groundwater to areas where crops needed moisture, essentially weaponizing hydraulic pressure to achieve agricultural results that seemed impossible under drought conditions. The physics involved precise calculations of water pressure, soil composition, and timing that Old Joe had worked out through trial and error over decades of farming experience. By creating controlled hydraulic pressure using gravity feed from elevated water sources, he could generate water jets powerful enough to cut through clay soil and redirect water flow across distances of several hundred yards with accuracy that approached mechanical precision. Billy had enlisted in the Army in 1942 immediately after Pearl Harbor, despite having an agricultural deferment that would have kept him safely on the farm throughout the war, contributing to food production that was considered essential to the war effort. But Billy couldn't stand the thought of other men fighting for American freedom while he stayed home growing cotton, even though his farming skills were considered essential to the war effort and his mechanical aptitude with tractors and farm equipment had already made him one of the most valuable workers in rural Alabama. The transition from farming to tank warfare had been surprisingly natural for Billy because both required understanding the relationship between heavy machinery and ground conditions under pressure. Tank training at Fort Knox had come naturally to Billy because driving a Sherman wasn't fundamentally different from driving a John Deere tractor through Alabama mud. Both required understanding how tracks and ground pressure work together to provide mobility under conditions that would stop wheeled vehicles. Thompson, his tank training instructor, had said after watching Billy maneuver a Sherman through obstacles that had defeated other trainees, using techniques that weren't described in any manual but seemed to come naturally to the Alabama farm boy. You drive that tank like you grew up in one. Where'd you learn to read ground conditions like that? And how do you know exactly when soil will support weight and when it won't? Alabama cotton fields, Sergeant, Billy had answered, not fully understanding that his grandfather's lessons about soil mechanics and hydraulic pressure would eventually save his life during the most dangerous tank battle of his military service. When you've spent your whole life figuring out how to get heavy equipment through mud that'll swallow a mule, a tank ain't nothing but a big tractor with a gun on it. But the real test of Billy's agricultural wisdom had come when he arrived in Europe and faced German panzer tactics that were designed to exploit American inexperience with armored warfare. German tank commanders like Richter had years of combat experience and tactical doctrine that emphasized firepower, protection, and maneuverability, while American tank crews were learning through trial and error in battles where mistakes meant death and there were no second chances for pilots who miscalculated the physics of armored combat. The deadly trap that almost worked perfectly had been set by Richter's Panzer unit during the early hours of December 17, when German forces broke through American defensive lines and surrounded the village of Saint-Vith using classic blitzkrieg tactics that had proven successful throughout the European war, creating a tactical situation that appeared hopeless for any American tank force foolish enough to attempt relief of the trapped garrison. Richter's Tiger I had positioned itself on Hill 117, a commanding position that overlooked the muddy valley where American tanks would be forced to maneuver if they attempted to break through German encirclement and relieve the trapped garrison at Saint-Vith. The tactical situation was a textbook example of German armored superiority, high ground advantage, superior firepower, favorable weather conditions, and enemy forces forced into a killing zone with no tactical alternatives except retreat or destruction. The German defensive position had been carefully selected to maximize the Tigers' advantages while minimizing American opportunities for effective response. Hill 117 provided elevation that extended the range and accuracy of Richter's 88mm gun while offering excellent observation of the entire valley floor where American tanks would be forced to advance through mud conditions that limited their mobility and made them predictable targets. German intelligence had correctly anticipated that American forces would attempt to relieve Saint-Vith using the only available approach route through the valley, because alternative approaches required crossing rivers or ascending hills that would expose American tanks to even more devastating German fire. The tactical situation had been designed to force American commanders into choosing between abandoning the Saint-Vith garrison or sacrificing tank units in hopeless attacks against prepared German positions. American armor approaching from the southwest, Richter's gunner reported through the Tigers intercom system as Billy's Sherman tank company advanced through the muddy valley in single file, exactly as German tactical planning had predicted. For Sherman tanks, moving slowly due to mud conditions. They have no choice but to advance through the kill zone to reach the village. Richter studied the approaching American tanks through his commander's periscope, calculating range and deflection while analyzing enemy movement patterns that would determine the optimal sequence for destroying all 4 targets before any could escape or return effective fire. The mathematics were straightforward and favored German success. The Tiger's 88mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor at twice the range that Sherman guns could threaten the Tiger's thick frontal armor. The tactical doctrine that Richter was implementing had been developed through years of German combat experience and represented the culmination of Wehrmacht armored warfare philosophy: use superior equipment to create overwhelming firepower advantage, then apply that advantage systematically to destroy enemy forces piece by piece while minimizing German casualties through superior positioning and tactical preparation. Gunner, target the lead tank first, Richter commanded as Billy Sherman moved into the optimal killing range where German firepower advantage was absolute and American tactical options were reduced to hoping for German mechanical failure or miraculous intervention. 1 shot, 1 kill. Then traverse to the second tank before the Americans can react. We will destroy all 4 tanks within 60 seconds and demonstrate the futility of American armored tactics against German superiority. But Richter's tactical calculations were based on conventional armored warfare doctrine that assumed both sides would fight according to established principles of tank gunnery, maneuver, and positioning that had been developed through years of European warfare. What Richter couldn't calculate was Billy Thompson's unconventional approach to armored combat, which was about to prove that Alabama farm wisdom could defeat German mathematical precision under circumstances where conventional military tactics offered no hope of survival. The psychological pressure on Billy's crew was enormous and completely understandable given their tactical situation. They were advancing into a kill zone where enemy fire was guaranteed, escape was impossible, and survival depended on factors beyond their control. Jake Martinez had been in tank combat for 8 months and had never faced odds this hopeless against an enemy this competent using equipment this superior. "Billy, we're dead men if we continue this approach," Jake said as their Sherman tank moved deeper into Richter's killing zone while the German Tiger adjusted its aim for the shot that would end their war permanently. "That German has us zeroed in from perfect position. We can't outfight him, we can't outrun him, and we can't hide from him. What are we going to do that every other tank crew hasn't already tried and failed?" The moment that changed everything came when Billy realized that Richter's tactical advantage depended on clear lines of sight and predictable target movement, both of which could be disrupted using the same hydraulic principles that old Joe Thompson had used to redirect rivers and control flood waters during Alabama spring storms when conventional methods had failed and only agricultural innovation could save the crops. "Jake, I need you to trust me on something that's going to sound crazy," Billy said to his gunner as their Sherman tank approached the kill zone where Richter's Tiger was waiting to deliver the shot that would end their war permanently. "We're going to use this mud like a weapon instead of treating it like an obstacle. My granddaddy taught me that water and dirt can be directed with enough force to cut through almost anything if you understand the physics." The muddy field outside Saint-Vith had been created by 3 days of freezing rain followed by the movement of heavy military equipment across terrain that couldn't support the weight of tanks under saturated soil conditions. The result was a soupy mixture of clay, water, an organic matter that behaved more like liquid than solid ground when subjected to the right kind of mechanical pressure applied with precise timing and understanding of hydraulic dynamics. Billy had grown up understanding that mud wasn't just dirt and water, it was a hydraulic medium that could be manipulated using pressure, velocity, and timing to achieve effects that seemed impossible to people who thought of mud as simply a mobility problem rather than a potential weapon system. But Alabama cotton farmers knew that mud could be redirected, concentrated, and weaponized if you understood the physics of fluid dynamics and soil mechanics that governed how liquid earth responded to mechanical force. The specific technique that Billy was about to attempt had been developed by Old Joe during the 1936 drought, when he had used high-pressure water jets created by controlled hydraulic pressure to break up clay hardpan and redirect groundwater flow across distances of several hundred yards. The principle was based on creating sufficient pressure differential to launch liquid earth in concentrated streams that could travel long distances while maintaining coherence and impact force. "What are you thinking, Billy?" Jake asked as their Sherman tank moved deeper into Richter's killing zone while the German Tiger adjusted its aim for the shot that would penetrate their armor and kill everyone inside the vehicle within the next 10 seconds according to Richter's mathematical calculations. "I'm thinking about Old Joe redirecting the Alabama River using nothing but shovels and mules," Billy replied as he worked the Sherman's controls in ways that no tank manual had ever described, using techniques he'd learned driving tractors through cotton fields that would either save their lives or get them killed in the most spectacular armor failure of the European War. Billy's plan was to use the Sherman's tracks and the physics of fluid displacement to create a high-pressure mud spray that would obscure Richter's vision and deflect the German tank's aim at the critical moment when the 88mm shell was fired. The technique required precise timing, perfect understanding of soil conditions, and the kind of mechanical intuition that came from years of agricultural experience under pressure when crop survival depended on understanding exactly how mechanical force could be applied to natural materials to achieve specific results. The physics were complex but the principle was simple. By spinning the Sherman's tracks at maximum RPM while simultaneously engaging the tank's forward drive, Billy could create a rooster tail of mud and water that would travel at high velocity in a controlled direction, temporarily blinding the German tank commander and disrupting the optical systems that Richter needed for accurate gunnery at the critical moment when precision would determine who lived and who died. The execution required Billy to coordinate track speed, forward momentum, and steering input to create maximum hydraulic pressure while maintaining enough control to direct the mud spray toward Richter's Tiger with accuracy sufficient to disrupt German vision systems. It was the kind of precise mechanical control that came from years of operating heavy equipment under agricultural conditions where small mistakes could destroy entire crops and large mistakes could kill the operator. "Hold on tight," Billy shouted as he executed the maneuver that would either save their lives or kill them all, using Alabama farm wisdom to challenge German military precision in a tank battle that would be remembered as one of the most unusual tactical innovations of World War II. The mud explosion that saved everything happened at exactly 0849 hours when Billy's Sherman tracks bit into the saturated clay soil and created a hydraulic effect that launched approximately 200 gallons of liquid mud in a concentrated stream directly toward Richter's Tiger tank at the precise moment when the German commander was preparing to fire the shot that would have killed Billy's entire crew. The rooster tail of mud and water rose 30 feet into the air and traveled over 100 yards at high velocity, striking Richter's Tiger Eye just as the German tank commander was acquiring his final sight picture for what should have been a guaranteed kill shot at 800 yards range. The liquid mud splattered across the Tiger's vision ports, periscope lenses, and gun sight optics, temporarily blinding Richter and his crew at the critical moment when precision was essential for accurate gunnery. "Skies! I cannot see the target," Richter's gunner shouted through the Tiger's intercom as mud and dirty water obscured every optical system on the German tank, transforming mathematical precision into blind guesswork at exactly the moment when Richter was squeezing the trigger of his 88mm cannon. The 22-pound armor-piercing shell that should have killed Billy Thompson's crew instead whistled harmlessly over their Sherman tank, missing by 6 feet and striking the muddy ground 50 yards behind their position. For the first time in his combat career, SS Oberfuhrer Klaus Richter had missed a shot that should have been impossible to miss under normal circumstances. But Billy's mud technique had done more than disrupt one shot, it had temporarily reversed the tactical advantage by blinding the German tank while leaving the American Sherman's visibility unimpaired. For approximately 45 seconds, Billy's crew had the opportunity to maneuver and return fire against a Tiger tank that couldn't see them clearly enough to engage effectively. "Jake, put a round right through his driver's vision port while he's still blinded," Billy commanded as he maneuvered the Sherman to take advantage of the temporary tactical reversal that his agricultural engineering had created. "We've got maybe 30 seconds before he clears his optics and gets another shot at us." Jake Martinez had grown up in East Los Angeles and had never seen a cotton farm, but he understood opportunity when it presented itself. The Sherman's 75mm gun wasn't powerful enough to penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor under normal circumstances, but Richter's tank was temporarily vulnerable because its crew couldn't see well enough to maintain optimal defensive positioning. The American return shot struck Richter's Tiger eye in the driver's vision port, causing internal damage that didn't penetrate the heavy armor but created shock waves and spalling that injured the German driver and forced the Tiger to retreat from its commanding position on Hill 117. For the first time in 127 tank engagements, Klaus Richter had been forced to withdraw from a tactical engagement by inferior American equipment operated by a crew that understood mud better than they understood conventional armored warfare. The chain reaction that changed the battle began when Richter's withdrawal from Hill 117 allowed Billy's Sherman Tank Company to advance through the valley and relieve the trapped American garrison at St. Vith, preventing German forces from achieving the breakthrough that would have compromised the entire Allied defensive line during the Battle of the Bulge. "Thompson, what the hell did you just do?" Captain Robert Hayes demanded over the radio as Billy's mud technique was repeated by other Sherman tanks in the company, creating a coordinated barrage of liquid mud that disrupted German tank gunnery throughout the engagement. "I've been fighting tanks for 18 months and I've never seen anything like that maneuver." "Alabama irrigation, Captain," Billy replied as his Sherman continued maneuvering through terrain that had been transformed from German killing zone to American tactical advantage through the application of agricultural engineering under combat conditions. Sometimes the best way to fight superior firepower is to make sure it can't see what it's shooting at. The tactical innovation that Billy had developed under pressure was immediately adopted by other American tank crews who faced similar situations against superior German armor. The Thompson technique became an unofficial but widely used method for disrupting German tank gunnery using environmental conditions that German training hadn't prepared them to handle. But the most significant impact was psychological rather than tactical. Klaus Richter, who had built his reputation on mathematical precision and never missing a shot, had been defeated by an American farm boy using agricultural techniques that weren't described in any military manual. The psychological effect on German tank crews was immediate and devastating. If the legendary Klaus Richter could be defeated by American ingenuity, then no German tank commander was invulnerable. The personal humiliation that destroyed everything came when Richter's commanding officer, Oberst Heinrich Müller, demanded an explanation for the first tactical failure in Richter's otherwise perfect combat record, forcing the German tank ace to admit that he had been defeated by American agricultural techniques rather than superior military equipment or tactics, creating a crisis of confidence that would ripple through German armored units throughout the remainder of the war. "Richter," Müller said during the post-battle debrief in the basement of a destroyed French farmhouse, his voice carrying the cold authority of an officer who had built his career on German military superiority and could not comprehend how the most experienced tank commander in the Reich had been defeated by inferior American equipment operated by farm boys with no formal military education. "You have never missed a shot at that range under any circumstances. How did an inferior American tank escape destruction when you had perfect positioning and clear lines of sight?" Richter's answer revealed the extent to which Billy's mud technique had disrupted German confidence in their tactical superiority and challenged fundamental assumptions about Wehrmacht invincibility that had sustained German military morale throughout 4 years of increasingly desperate warfare. The explanation was both accurate and devastating to German military pride. "The Americans used some kind of agricultural technique to create a mud spray that blinded our optics at the critical moment," Richter replied, his voice reflecting the professional humiliation of a career soldier who had been defeated by tactics that weren't described in any military manual and couldn't be countered using conventional armored warfare doctrine. I have never encountered this tactic before, and our training has not prepared us for environmental warfare applications that weaponize natural conditions rather than simply overcoming them through superior firepower. Mueller's response was swift, brutal, and calculated to prevent any suggestion that American ingenuity could consistently defeat German military superiority through unconventional tactics that exploited weaknesses in Wehrmacht doctrine that had never been identified or addressed during years of successful campaigns across Europe. You are telling me that the most experienced tank commander in the Reich was defeated by American farmers throwing mud? Mueller demanded, his voice rising with the kind of incredulous anger that came from realizing that fundamental assumptions about German military superiority might be incorrect. This explanation is unacceptable. You will be reassigned to training duties where your tactical failures cannot compromise operational effectiveness. We cannot have experienced commanders spreading defeatist propaganda about American tactical innovations. The reassignment ended Richter's combat career and eliminated one of Germany's most effective tank commanders from the battlefield at exactly the moment when German armor forces needed experienced leadership to counter increasingly effective American tactical innovations that were beginning to neutralize German technological advantages through creative application of unconventional warfare methods. But the psychological impact extended far beyond Richter's personal career destruction. News of the legendary tank ace's defeat by American agricultural techniques spread through German armored units despite official attempts to suppress the information, creating doubts about Wehrmacht invincibility that had sustained German military morale throughout the most difficult phases of the war. German tank crews who had previously approached combat with confidence based on superior equipment and training now faced the unsettling possibility that American forces could develop tactical innovations that negated German advantages through methods that German military doctrine had never anticipated or prepared to counter. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating to German combat effectiveness. Richter's psychological destruction was as significant as any physical damage that Allied tanks could have inflicted on German panzer units, because it demonstrated that experienced German commanders could be defeated by American ingenuity applied under pressure, calling into question the fundamental assumptions about military superiority that had justified German aggression and sustained Wehrmacht morale through years of increasingly desperate combat. The ripple effects of Richter's defeat continued throughout the remainder of the Battle of the Bulge, as other German tank commanders became increasingly cautious when engaging American armor in muddy conditions, reducing the tactical aggressiveness that had been the hallmark of German armored operations since the beginning of the war. But for Billy Thompson, the victory was personal rather than strategic. He had used his grandfather's wisdom to survive an encounter with the deadliest tank commander in the German army, proving that American ingenuity could overcome superior enemy equipment when applied with courage and creativity under extreme pressure when conventional military tactics offered no hope of survival. The legacy that outlasted the war extended far beyond one tank battle to establish principles of tactical innovation that continued to influence military doctrine long after the specific circumstances of World War II had passed into history. Billy's mud technique was analyzed by Army engineers and incorporated into tank training programs that emphasized environmental warfare and unconventional tactical solutions to superior enemy firepower. The concept that local knowledge and agricultural expertise could be applied to military problems became part of American military culture and contributed to tactical flexibility that distinguished American forces from enemies who relied too heavily on rigid doctrine. More importantly, Billy's victory demonstrated that democratic societies produced soldiers who could innovate under pressure using knowledge and experience that couldn't be taught in military schools or acquired through theoretical study. The connection between American agricultural heritage and military effectiveness became a source of national pride that reinforced the relationship between civilian skills and military success. After the war, Billy returned to Alabama and took over his grandfather's cotton farm, using the mechanical skills he'd learned in the Army to modernize agricultural equipment and improve crop yields. But he never forgot that his grandfather's wisdom about mud and water had saved his life and the lives of his crew during the most dangerous moment of his military service. The human story that made it all meaningful was preserved in letters between Billy Thompson and his grandfather, documenting not just the technical details of agricultural techniques applied to armored warfare but the family traditions and rural wisdom that had enabled an Alabama farm boy to defeat German military precision through courage and creativity. Granddaddy, Billy wrote in a letter from Europe after the St. Vith battle, I used your irrigation technique to beat a German tank that should have killed me and my crew. Turns out that Alabama mud works just as good on Tiger tanks as it does on floods. Who would have thought that all those years learning to move dirt and water would save my life in a tank battle? Old Joe Thompson's response revealed the connection between practical knowledge and survival that had sustained rural American families through generations of hardship. Billy, I always told you that if you understand how things work, you can make them work for you instead of against you. Don't matter if it's water, dirt, or German tanks, the principles are the same. Use what you know, trust what you've learned, and don't let anybody tell you that book learning is better than real experience. Billy Thompson proved that sometimes the most sophisticated military equipment can be defeated by the simplest application of practical knowledge when that knowledge is combined with courage and applied under extreme pressure. His victory at St. Vith demonstrated that American democracy's greatest strength was not superior technology but the diversity of experience and ingenuity that came from a society where farm boys could become tank commanders and where agricultural wisdom could be weaponized against enemy precision. So here's the question Billy Thompson's story poses: when facing superior enemy capabilities, how do you find advantages in your own experience and background that enemies haven't prepared for? What drives an American soldier to trust his grandfather's farming wisdom over military doctrine when his life depends on making the right decision under fire? And how does practical knowledge acquired through civilian work become a military asset when applied with courage and creativity during moments of extreme danger? Billy Thompson proved that the most effective weapons are often not the ones with the biggest caliber or the thickest armor, but the ones that come from understanding your environment better than your enemy does and having the courage to apply that knowledge in ways that no military manual ever anticipated.